And one of the things that happens with these stories then becomes so inspiring for later people who will insert them into a different history, whether Naguib Mahfouz. I wonder which you find the most interesting modern adaptations, and what are they doing both narratively and culturally, politically with this source text?
There are so many different things going on in the adaptations, and there are some great 19th century adaptations. Edgar Allan Poe's 1002nd Night of Scheherazade, a great, very ironic, parodic story, really, in which Scheherazade tells stories about real things. She just tells them in fantastical ways, and the king to whom she is telling them doesn't believe her, and so he kills her at the end. The one story he believes is the story that is fictionalized. So it plays very interesting. In fact, the epigraph to the story is "Truth is stranger than fiction," and so it plays with that.
Very Borgesian story, isn't it?
What are these stories doing, in fact, to our sense of reality? Gautier has another great story, The 1002nd Night, in which he plays, again with the figure of Scheherazade, who seems to have run out of stories and is desperate and finds her way into Gautier's hashish-ridden parlor and asks him to tell her a story. But the story fails, and she too is killed at the end. Her sister is left wailing her death, holding a handkerchief that is blood-spattered. It's a fascinating story. Those are stories that really are much more interested in the orientalizing potential of the 1001 Nights. 20th century sees extraordinary adaptations, not only literary, but also filmic, dramatic, visual as well. You mentioned Naguib Mahfouz, of course, coming out of the great Nobel Prize winner coming out of Egypt, who wrote a novel called Arabian Days and Nights, in which he uses the figures from the 1001 Nights. He uses the characters, but he doesn't follow through on the storylines at all. And he's using that text, and I think in that case, really to talk about contemporary politics in Egypt and to talk about Egyptian history, very much so. So he's able to talk about certain things using this now venerated text that he wouldn't be able to talk about directly or in a more realist fashion.
And what about feminist rewriting?
The feminist rewriting that I personally find the most interesting is the one that most people don't, I think, talk about. It's Leila Sabar's Scheherazade, which is thought to be, I think, the first Francophone novel. It's written in 1982, I believe. It's the first of a trilogy, and it is about this young woman from Algiers who is living in France with her family, whose name is Sherazade, so you lose the H-E in there, and who is very much using all of these orientalizing tropes, notions of the exotic woman. She's using them against the people who are confronting her with them. So she is resisting this kind of stereotyping herself in an effort to find some kind of essential identity as a woman. And she then leaves France and ends up traveling, returning to Algeria, and then traveling to the Middle East in this effort to find her identity. But very much a novel that really is looking at the figure of Scheherazade as a woman who has in some sense been orientalized, who has had her gifts used against her in a certain way.
And what do you think happens with these stories when they've become filmed?
So that's such an interesting history, and I think somebody ought to write a book about the film history of the 1001 Nights. Early film is fascinated with the 1001 Nights. It's so interesting. In 1905, the great Georges Méliès, Le Palais des Mille et Une Nuits, it's this wildly experimental film that draws on the 1001 Nights. And around the same time, the Pathé Frères brothers are also using the 1001 Nights. They're experimenting with film, but they're using the nights in their experiments. They're so fascinated by the kind of metamorphic value in these stories, especially in the Pathé Frères case of they film Ali Baba and Aladdin. So all of these incredible transformations stories that go on. This simple boy who becomes this rich man, or you rub the lamp and suddenly your whole environment is transformed. And I think that they're fascinated by that transformational power of these stories that is, I think, being mirrored in the film itself and in the new medium.
So the new medium
itself.
now takes, instead of storytelling, it's now
this
it's
new
film.
medium that can show you. So it's really interesting to look at the way they deal with these sort of transformational scenes in those stories. So they film, as I said, Ali Baba and Aladdin. And then, of course, The Great Thief of Baghdad, 1924, the Douglas Fairbanks Jr. film, which really does so much to establish all of those visual tropes that we associate with the 1001 Nights, the round cupolas, the harem pants, those signifiers that we are in this Oriental culture. The silent film, but a film that doesn't need language, so powerful is the visual element. That Thief of Baghdad is taken in 1940 by Alexander Korda, who uses the Oriental actor Sabu to tell the same story. So it goes on and on. There's a great series of Popeye cartoons in the 1930s in which Popeye is the sailor and he is the hero of the story, and he uses, olive oil is the woman in distress, sort of remarkably. Pluto, is that the name of his nemesis? His arch nemesis is always the enemy. But these are very interesting. They're done in the 30s, and they're clearly made as commentaries on an American political situation and the threat that is coming over from Europe and Germany in particular. So they're very interesting that way.
What's your opinion on Disney's Aladdin?
I have to confess that I'm a great fan of Disney's Aladdin. It's probably the greatest embodiment of this filmic tradition, 1992. I could critique it at length. It's interesting, you may recall that the Arab Anti-Defamation League
They really didn't like it, right? The villains have darker skin and hooked noses, right? Jafar and so on.
Exactly. They were successful in their complaint against the opening song, the lyrics to which originally...
It's barbaric, but hey, it's home.
That's right. Where they cut off your hands if they don't like your face. It's barbaric, but hey, it's home. And they protested this quite vigorously and were successful. So Disney took that piece of the song out and replaced it with more anodyne lyrics.
So despite that, what works for you with the film?
Well, I think the genie, I think Robin Williams as the genie is brilliant. I think he really is. He's everything a genie should be. He's even blue. I just think he's brilliant as the genie. He is in so many ways this embodiment of Western culture. That song, A Friend Like Me, which is such a great song in which he references all kinds of totemic moments, from Groucho Marx to casinos in Las Vegas to Ethel Merman. I love it when he plays the French maître d' and he pulls out the menu that has Arabic written on it. It's a sort of wonderful send-up of all of these things that we associate not only with Aladdin, but also with America. It's a very American movie, which is one of the things that's so interesting about it. The Aladdin figure was modeled on Tom Cruise, and he does in fact look a lot like Tom Cruise. Princess Jasmine figure was modeled on I believe the director's sister. So they have these very clear American prototypes to be their heroes and heroines.
So it is interesting how this sort of most unnational of original text becomes inserted into all these national contexts, cultural reconfigurations, almost more specific than it ever was in its own original from how you read it.
Absolutely, but remember that Aladdin is not one of the original 1001 Nights stories, and is probably one of the ones that Guélan more or less created himself. But yes, very much so. And I think that's one of the extraordinary things about the 1001 Nights, is that it is so adaptive. It is so accommodating, culturally accommodating of so many different traditions.